I'm Sarah Smith, family doctor, clinical day advisor, and the chatting coach. Welcome back to Sustainable Clinical Medicine podcast, where we're going to be interviewing peers or world experts who can help us think about our clinical day in a way that is more sustainable and create time for our lives outside of medicine. Hi, everybody, and welcome back. Today we have with us Dr. Rachel Morris. I'm so excited to talk to you today. Welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great. Tell us a bit about you.
So I'm Rachel. I live in Cambridgeshire. I have been a GP for most of my life. About 10 years ago, I did a bit of a career shift and I now work full time as a podcast host, a keynote speaker, and I also have a training business and we help doctors and other professionals in high stress jobs beat burnout and work happier.
Love it. Okay. So do you mind taking us back through your journey? What attracted you to general practice? How was it being a general practitioner in the UK? Loves and challenges along the way.
Yeah, why did I become a GP? I don't really know, actually. My dad was a GP, my mum was an ophthalmologist, and I couldn't think what I wanted to do when I grew up. So I just went to medical school, as you do. And when I finished medical school, I still didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. So I went on a GP rotation because I thought at least if I rotate around peds and obs and medicine, I'll be able to stop off somewhere if I prefer that sort of thing. But I didn't, and I ended up in general practice and ended up really enjoying the fact that you saw patients time and time again and the continuity of care and all that sort of stuff. But whilst I was doing my GP training, there was an option to do a bit of an extension, and I also started to do a bit of medical education. So alongside my GP job, I also worked at the University of Cambridge, first as Assistant Director of GP Studies, and then I set up and led the Doctor as a Professional bit of the curriculum, which got me interested in the professional behaviour of busy people in terms of like teamwork, resilience, patient safety, all that sort of stuff, which I found really fascinating because I didn't really know much about it. So I ended up doing a dual job, being a portfolio GP and doing medical education as well.
Yeah, okay. Tell us about being a GP in the UK, your experience on a day-to-day.
It's changing all the time. And I think even since I left, it's got more and more difficult. So I haven't practiced clinically since just after COVID, when I decided to focus on doing one thing rather than doing lots and lots of things not quite so well. But in the UK, because we have this NHS, a nationally funded health service, people turn up to their GPs with anything and everything. And so you have to really expect anything to come along. In my day, we were doing 10-minute appointments. I know many people have gone to 15-minute appointments as well. And it's still really not enough. It's hard because I don't know what it's like where you work, but as a GP now, when I first qualified in 2002, 2003, we were still doing lots of pill checks, sore throats and things like that, the easy stuff, along with the more complex stuff. But now a lot of that easy, simple stuff is seen by other healthcare professionals, and the GPs are left with the multimorbidity, the really complicated stuff, and they're often supervising lots of other people in the practice as well. So the patients are getting older and more complicated, and the time is really difficult, and demand went out massively after COVID, and it still stayed up. And there's a real staffing crisis in general practice as well, in that there's a lot of new GPs and locum GPs who can't actually get a job because the health service in its wisdom is trying to fill a lot of those roles with allied health professionals who aren't GPs, so paramedics and physicians, associates and things like that. So there's a lot bigger mix of different healthcare professionals in general practice, but it does mean that some salaried GPs are really actually struggling to get work, even though it's very difficult to get a GP appointment. So this is a bizarre situation where GPs are burning out at a rate of knots, yet some of them can't find work, yet we need more GPs. It's a very odd situation at the moment, I think.
Yeah, yeah. In your day-to-day, when you were working, how did it go? Were you done at the end of the day? What were the challenges of the day?
A day in general practice, I think, is like no other. And it was absolutely exhausting, particularly if you're on call, you're on all day. And in certain surgeries where I worked, you were not only duty doctor, but you saw your own patient list as well, and you had the calls fit in with you and you had maybe a few appointments blocked off. In the last surgery where I worked, it was actually much better because they had a team of duty doctors that shared it out between them, and you weren't expected to see the routine patients whilst you were on call. But I still found it incredibly draining seeing at least 15 patients per surgery. So getting through 30, 35, 40, and nowadays with total triage and stuff, a lot of GPs are having like 40 plus patient contacts a day, which just, I think it's such a big drain on the energy, and it's really exhausting, and it's really important to look after yourself and be sustainable when you're working with a workload like that.
Yeah. And like how you put that, it's not just the patients in appointment slots. There's then the things you're doing inside your inbox or the questions being asked about patients that are all part of patient contact, because you have to consider the patient's information, the information you're being given about today's question, find an answer appropriate, and then get it back to the patient. So that is a true patient contact. We forget that is patient contact numbers for our day, and we're just doing it as part of the work of the day.
Yeah, and you might be just on your way out the door and the receptionist says, "Oh, can I just check about this patient?" And actually, you've got to make a clinical decision about something where you might not have, it for other people, it's, "Can I just check? Can I ask you something?" And for you, it's like a whole decision-making process which carries risk and uncertainty. And so it's a big emotional load and a huge amount of responsibility, I think.
I'm glad that the person who is now into the University of Cambridge had come from this complicated background, because this clinical work, you've really got boots on the ground, understanding what does it take to look after humans as a general practitioner? What does it take to do a day in the life of general practice? And then you went to the university. Tell us what you learned about the other parts of medicine that you hadn't really been shown before.
When I worked at the university, it was great because obviously we were working with lots of other amazing doctors working at the clinical school. I think it showed me that doctors are the same, whether they're in primary care, secondary care, tertiary care. They all are very good people and very over responsible and incredibly hardworking. And in, the pace at which they work, they're saying, "Ask a busy person." It's true. If someone is working really hard, you ask them to do something else, they'll just go, "Yeah," and they'll get on and do it. And the people that I was working with, they were running their own services, being clinical directors, and still teaching medical students and running parts of the course and everything. Incredibly high-flying people, as you can imagine. In Cambridge, I was quite in awe of a lot of them. But I did learn that also we all are human, no matter how much we try and deny it. And I really enjoyed working, and particularly with one colleague doing the patient safety curriculum, and he was director of transplant surgery, actually. And I just thought he was brilliant because he was always saying, "Look, Rachel, surgeons, we are human too, and we need to remember that." And he was always trying to just to drill into people about how important looking after yourself and resilience. Although I don't like to talk about resilience anymore, don't really like that word. But yeah, I was in awe because he'd talk about pressurized job operating for hours and hours and hours on end. That's where, it really becomes incredibly important, like your physical and mental state. So there were a lot of incredible people. I did learn a lot about how to teach resilience and teamwork and all that sort of thing at the university, because we were teaching undergraduate medical students, and it was interesting. We were trying to teach them these skills, which we knew would be really important for them as they progress through their career, but they weren't really ready to learn them. If you'd have tried, when I was 22, tried to teach me about self-awareness and resilience and self-care, I'd have been like, "Oh, I'm fine. I can cope. I've been out clubbing all night and then gone and passed an exam and I'm fine." Because I don't think you really know what pressure is like until you've been on that shift all week and you're bleeped at 4 a.m. and there's nobody to help you and you're at the end of your tether and you feel responsible for a team. And so, yeah, after that experience of trying to teach students stuff they didn't really want to learn about, and why would you if you've got your pathology exam coming up? Why would you want to spend an hour doing sort of self-reflection? Yeah, if you've got a pathology exam coming up, the last thing you want to do is spend an hour in self-reflection with a group of other students. So I've been really puzzling about how do you teach sustainability and resilience in a way that actually is accessible to people they want to learn and is actually going to be useful to them in the long run.
Hmm. Yeah. Did you solve that question?
I didn't at the time. I think I realized that, well, since then, I know that actually the more senior, the more experienced people are, the more desperate they are to learn these techniques because they
Yeah.
know them. And so
Yeah.
I think I would just not try and force anyone to learn anything that they weren't ready to learn and be try and be a bit more experiential with people, perhaps, I think.
Yeah. You said some interesting things. You said the doctors are good and the doctors are very responsible people, but I see this going in a bad direction for these busy people who keep getting given more things because they're busy. I just hear that story a lot. Tell me more about that.
Well, it's something I've been thinking about a lot recently because I ended up really not really enjoying my GP job and it never 100% suited me. So I trained as a coach and then eventually I left clinical medicine thinking, oh, that's going to be the solution to feeling a little bit burnt out and stuff. But actually, running my own organization, I got into exactly the same situation because I fell into what I call the responsibility trap. And I think good people in high stress, high stakes jobs who want to do good in the world and want to help people, it's such a big trap that we fall into. And I think we end up just carrying the responsibility for everything. And I used to talk a lot, and I still do, about how to set boundaries and say no. But what I realized with some doctors, it wasn't landing. And we said, why not? And they said, it's not about saying no because we never said yes. We were never asked in the first place to respond. It just landed on us. And I think doctors in particular end up carrying the default responsibility in three ways. First of all, a job needs doing. No one else is doing it. So they just do it. They
Mhm.
notice the gap and they do it. They pick it up because they feel they ought to. They should. Secondly, if someone asks them, they feel they ought to. There's never any doubt about, I've been asked to do this, therefore, should I or not? Or can I say no? Someone's in need, I need to help them. So there's this rescuer role that we take on. And thirdly, because a lot of people have said this, the job is just too big and the system expects it. And I've lost count of the amount of times people have said, I've just been given these absolutely impossible targets, but I have to meet them or I have to
Mm.
do this. And I'm like, if you can't, how can it be that you have to? They're like, I have no choice. But just because the system expects it or the contract says you must, and in the UK we have a issue with the new GP contract right now that's being imposed on people. People think we literally can't meet this, but I'm going to have to, but we can't. So it's this sort of feeling responsible for something that you absolutely can't control. And that is impossible. And it's an incredibly stressful place to be. So until we get responsibility right in our heads, it's always going to feel like a real slog. And I think the guilt and the overwhelm and the burden of that responsibility is huge.
Yeah, agree. And while you hear people in not medical fields saying, if it doesn't get done, it just won't get done, or somebody else will do it. But when it's in healthcare and it's a human, and if you don't take that extra step, then you know there's going to be consequences for the human. But it's not always just the medical decisions. I think we take responsibility in areas that aren't truly that life or death decision.
Yeah.
It's the yes, I'm saying yes to 100 emails and I'm saying yes to 100 patient phone calls and I'm saying yes to trying to meet each of my patients' metrics. There's so many ticker boxes. I hear it from the UK doctors. I hear it in the US as well. I need to meet these metrics. It's tied to bonuses or it's tied to career, it's
Mm.
tied to a job, and it's incredibly administrative heavy and it's not doctor work.
No, it's funny because you say we can't say no and we feel we've got to do it because a patient needs it. In the talks and online course that I do, I like to do this poll and I do it on Zoom or I do it live in a room and I say either vote on Zoom or stand up. And my question is, what stops you saying no or putting boundaries or just saying I'm not going to do it? And your four options are number one, patient harm. It will cause patient harm. Number two, I don't want to inconvenience anybody. Number three
Mm.
is I'm worried about what people might think. And number four is I feel too guilty. Now, I've run this poll hundreds of times, and never has, if we had more than 20% of the room saying it's that number one thing because it would cause patient harm. So less than 20%. In fact, at the time when I did have around 20% of people stand up, it was fifth year medical students who were going, yes, I can't possibly say no because of patient harm. So it's really interesting. Mostly the reason that we don't say no is because we're worried about what other people might think. We feel guilty, we feel bad, we don't want to let people down, we don't want to inconvenience other people. It's actually not so common that it is because of patient harm. And I say, if you're going to say no and not do that thing, and genuinely a patient's going to be harmed, you can say yes, you can flex your boundaries. But actually, for the other stuff, it's much more about perfectionism, people pleasing, fear of complaints, all that sort of thing. And that is where we really have to look very hard at what we're doing, because I mean, I'm a massive people pleaser and it's really hard. But what a colleague said to me the other day, she said, I thought I was a real people pleaser until my therapist told me I was just trying to control other people's opinions of me. That hit quite hard. I was like, oh, that's really interesting, because we are defined, I think, as doctors so much by what we do and our output. All the years we've been judged by how clever we are, how many exams we've passed and our output. Then when the work is too much, what happens when we say, I'm not going to do that because I'm at the end of my capacity right now and I don't do it? The story in our heads that we tell ourselves is, I'm just not good enough. Anyone else would be able to cope. What's wrong with me? And you go very quickly from I'm not good enough to I am not enough. And we feel shame or we feel guilt. In the UK, and I'd love to hear if it's the same in Australia, but I'm sure it is, doctors feel really guilty about the stuff they can't control. The patient can't get the right treatment from the hospital, or the waiting lists are really high. You can't control that, but we feel awful about it. So we feel guilt, we feel shame, and then we feel a lot of fear. You know, what happens if I get a complaint, or what if this, or what if I upset someone, all that sort of stuff. And you can't please everyone all the time. And I think it's trying to and not being willing to disappoint anyone, that's what leads us into burnout. But it's really hard. I'm not saying this glibly, but I think there is no point teaching people about well-being, teaching people about productivity or anything until we are willing to not please everybody all the time. Because the best productivity and techniques in the world, you're still not going to get everything done that you need to do. You've actually just got to do less or do the things that are going to have the biggest impact that only you can do. Like you said, stop doing that non-doctor work that everyone else wants you to do.
Yeah. What's the consequence of not disappointing anyone? What are you seeing happening to the people you're working with who are coming to you saying, I do it all.
Yeah.
I can't disappoint anyone. I take
I mean,
responsibility for everything. I can't say no. What's
yeah.
actually happening to them? What are you noticing is the consequence of this mindset? And
Long term, if you're in that mindset, you're going to burn out
hmm,
because you cannot please everyone all the time. And if you do, you're going to please no one. One of my favorite podcasters, Glennon Doyle, who does the We Can Do Hard Things podcast, she says, if you have a choice of disappointing other people or yourself, you need to disappoint other people every time, because unless you disappoint someone, you're going to disappoint everyone. Because long term, you're just not going to be there to do the job. So you can put a barrier, you can put some boundaries in for one or two people, or eventually it's going to be everybody. So I think it's this myth that we can do it all if we just push a little bit harder, if we just try harder. It means that you end up pretty much not doing anything very well if you just try and do everything. And I think we say yes so readily, don't we? And then we let people down because we don't get round to it, or we do a shoddy job or something like that. So it's much better. And I would much prefer someone say a really clear no to me and give me the boundary right at the beginning than a sort of half-assed yes that you're not quite sure if they're actually going to do it and they're feeling put upon. That's not great. Brené Brown, she says, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. And yeah, initially people might not like it. I think we've got to get over the fact that not everyone is going to like your boundaries or your no's. People are like, I tried saying no, but I got so much pushback and they didn't like it. Yes, if you get pushback and people don't like it, that just means it's working. Doesn't mean that you were wrong to do it in the first place, but it's just holding that nerve. And we are very uncomfortable with other people's discomfort, with other people's disapproval, with other people's niggle or anger or whatever. And we just crumble. And that's again, we're trying to take responsibility for other people's emotions, which we can't control at all. So a lot of my work is actually starting with control, thinking, actually, what am I in control of? And what am I not in control of? So that's the first thing to do. Let's ditch the stuff that we're not in control of, because you can't do it anyway. So there's no point feeling guilty and responsible for that. So that's one big thing out the way. I say that like it's dead easy. We do whole workshops on how to care deeply without carrying something because you can't. But then that leaves you with the stuff that you could do, that's in your zone of power, as we call it, that is in your control. There's an awful lot you could do. But where's that going to get you if you try and do everything? Well, you're not going to do anything very well. So you then have to define, actually, there's all this stuff I could do, but what's in my capacity here? What am I here to do? What do I really need to do? What's the most important thing for me to do? That's a much smaller circle there. And I think the thing we need to get on top of is, what do we do with the rest? What do we do with that crescent at the bit outside that is in our control, but we're going to choose not to do that? And so a lot of what I do in my podcast and in our training is help people deal with that bit. The letting people say letting people down. No, you're not. You're choosing not to do that so that in the long term you don't let people down. So there's a lot of, let's think how we reframe that. Let's think about why it's triggering us, what's causing that discomfort in the first place. Because that is what we weren't taught at medical school. And if I'd have known that when I was teaching at Cambridge University, that I definitely would have been talking to the students about your amygdala, your reactions, why you need to take that pause, the neuroscience of all of that. Yeah, I think that would have been really helpful.
Yeah. Even the noticing how we think, noticing the automated responses to a ask, that work just unlinks the automatic yes to that pause in the middle, like you just said, of you get a question, you get an ask, and then you reflect on, what is the cost of doing that new role that they want me to do? How many hours does that take? I haven't done this before. There's some learning involved. Am I going to get paid for it? What would I have to give up in order to take that on? There's ways to hijack that automatic response.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, like I said, the pause is 100% your friend. If I can teach anybody anything, it's just pause and use the line, can I think about it and get back to you? I'm just going to need to check something. Get yourself out. Leave that email overnight. Don't answer now, because in the moment, every bit of your being wants to please that person in front of you. And that's a nice thing, isn't it? We're hardwired to please people in front of us, but that doesn't serve us well in the long run, does it? It makes people like you in the moment and think you're maybe a bit of a pushover or whatever, but in the long run, it doesn't serve you. In fact, I've started to put in my diary, when I've said no to things, I've actually started at the time when I would have been doing the thing, but I said no, so I've put that in my diary going, yay, no, just so that I can in the future go, thank you, past Rachel, for saying no to that, because I would have been really upset to be doing that right now.
I love that. I have done that at home, get home, reflect on the day with significant other, and be like, I said no to these things today.
Yeah, it's
Celebrating
quite,
that rather than I took on extra responsibility.
yeah. Yeah, I also think we should do a little bit more informed consent with ourselves as well, because I was looking to this recently, I think I did a podcast episode on it. Like, if you're consenting a patient for a procedure, you need to know that they have capacity, that they understand what's going to happen. They understand the long-term risks, the pros and the cons. And also, and here's the bit I think is really important, they have ongoing consent. I think so often we just say we'll do something or we'll just accept it without thinking, okay, what's the short-term benefit? What's the long-term benefit? What's the harm? What's the risk of harm if I do this to me or to my work? And then, do I need to keep doing it? Because a patient at any point can say, no, actually, I don't consent to this anymore. So I think that's another thing that once the responsibility is landed with you, we tend to feel that we can't get rid of it because we've already done it. But I don't know, you've got ongoing informed consent that you can do. But it's very difficult. And this is why the saying no thing and the default responsibility is so important. It's one thing saying no when somebody asks you, but when you've already taken the responsibility for something, saying no and getting rid of that responsibility, that feels like dumping on colleagues, or it
Mm.
feels like shirking your professional responsibility, which is why it's much harder to do than just the say no boundaries thing in the first place, which is why you get a room full of doctors and you talk about saying no, set boundaries, and they all go, yes, I completely agree. And then they go off and they just keep doing this
Yes.
massive job that nobody could do. But they're like, it's not that I can't say no because it is my job.
Yes.
Does that make
Yes.
sense?
I think I would love to see more succession training skills and delegation training skills. Because when you have a role, one of the rules of the role, let's take practice supervisor of the learners, right? Great role, fantastic, very rewarding. And sometimes your life doesn't match your ability to be that person anymore. But if you keep pushing yourself through it, and you've seen this in your clinics, you've seen the person who's been responsible for the students and they're getting more and more behind or more and more burnt out, we need to be training up the next one to take over and have that as part of the role of, I'm doing this for a season and I'm going to hand over the reins. And so who am I always bringing up in order to be able to take over this role? And with that team-based care, I'm not going to do 100 emails from patients or 100 messages from patients. We don't have time, especially if you're talking about 10-minute appointments with patients all day long, plus taking on extra, holy moly, that's so much. We don't have it. And how do we
No.
start delegating in a way that the team understand what we need and are able to help us? Who are we using and how are we using them? And what is the optimal way to use them so that we can take tasks off our plate?
Yeah. And I think this is something we don't do very well in primary care because recently we've done a team, it's called the Working Genius Assessment with the team that I work with. And you work out what you're really good at doing. So are you good at like strategy or are you really good at finishing off projects and things? Whereas in primary care, you're expected to do everything and everyone's expected to do everything. I was in a training session on how to design a career you're going to love. And we were talking about stuff. And one of the participants said, I absolutely love being on call. If I could just be on call constantly in my practice, oh, I just love it, but not have to do anything else. And then another person piped up and she said, you know what? She said, I love doing admin. I love the letters and the results and the admin. And they looked at each other and they went, we should just work in the same practice. I thought, yeah, 100% you should. You do the on-call, but you do the admin bit. But for some reason, there's no like provision. Or I know some practices now do, and they're allocating different roles to different people. But yeah, get people just working in their zone of genius, doing the bit you want. And the reason I'm saying this is because I always thought that certain tasks are just really awful and they just bore me silly and I struggle to do them. And I was talking to one of my team members the other day. I was like going, oh, this is on my list. And they're like, oh, let me at it. I love doing that. I was like, really? Really? You want to? They're like, yeah, I love that sort of thing. And I was really surprised. And I was like, I've just been assuming that no one
Mhm,
else wants to do that because I don't
mhm,
like doing it very
mhm,
much. And I think with delegation, we assume that no one else wants to do it, therefore it lands on us. But we make the
mhm,
mistake of thinking, A, if I'm the most senior person and someone else could do it, I'm actually wasting money
mhm,
because you're wasting time and money because someone else could do it. But also someone might love to learn how to do that because it trains them, it brings them up, it gives them more responsibility, it gives them a different thing to do, and it might be in their zone of genius rather than yours. But we just have this mindset that I can't possibly ask anybody because
mhm,
I'm dumping on them. And that is a real difference. But with running my own organization, I have to delegate out tasks to other people. There's no
mhm,
way I can do everything myself. Whereas when I was a GP, it did really feel like we were doing most stuff ourselves. But it's delegation is an absolute skill. So you're right. It's not just me going, oh, can you do that? You have to tell them what you want. And that's what I'm having to learn. Like, what does good look like? What am I
mhm,
actually asking this person to? When do I want it done by? What are the important considerations? How are we going to check back on it? How will we know when it's done? All sort of
mhm,
stuff. And then I can delegate properly. But until I've done that, and there's some control stuff in there. And of course, if you're delegating and it's patient stuff, there's an extra layer of how do we keep
mhm,
this clinically safe and has everyone got the right training? So it's hard and it takes time. That's probably the problem as well, isn't it? Like, who's going to
mhm,
spend 2 hours working out how to delegate that one tiny task. But if that one tiny task you're doing 100 times a week, then it's worth it, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. We are talking yesterday about number of keystrokes in order to order labs so that you're compliant with the rules of how to order the labs, and just the frustration in the room of, why do I have to know the rules? Why do I have to write the rules down every time I order this? Why does it take so long to do this within the appointment time that I have? And then we're like, this is a computer, it's trainable. We just have to find the right people to help us train it, and then it'll be less keystrokes and it'll be done. But that conversation with my team of new doctors saying, why is it? I'm like, great question. That's not helpful. It's more about what are the steps we need to make this happen in a better way? Who do we have to find? Who's our person? Who's our expert that can come in and help make this happen?
Yeah. And what I always find interesting is like you get one GP, if you're with a group of GPs and someone starts moaning about, oh, I've got this post, the other one goes, oh, this is what I do. And they're like, that's genius. Can you tell me how to do that? And someone else goes, yeah, I do it like this. And they go, how do I do that? And everyone's got their own shortcuts and they're all reinventing the wheel. And we've just shared a bit more and got together and said, this is how I do that. And yeah, we're not very good at cross-pollinating all the ideas, and with AI as well. I know healthcare is a little bit harder to use some of the AI because of data storage and data protection, stuff like that. But you can automate so much and it's so helpful. I think we need to be embracing that a lot more as well.
Yeah, yeah. Where can people find you if they're looking to learn more about what you do in the world?
Or if people want to hear me going on more about responsibility, choice, sustainability, all that sort of stuff, then I have a podcast called You Are Not a Frog. And you can find that at youarenotafrog.com. We have a YouTube channel. It's on all your usual podcast players as well. And if they want any training, we have training courses. One of them is called Beat Stress and Thrive. That's for healthcare professionals who want to beat burnout and work happier. We also have a couple of memberships, the Shapes Academy and Permission to Thrive. We have a podcast membership, so all over that. So you can also find me on LinkedIn, lots of different places. But start with youarenotafrog.com is probably the best way to go.
Perfect. And is there anything we didn't talk about that we should talk about before we end?
Gosh, I think the one thing I would say to people is when you're thinking about sustainability and well-being and all that sort of stuff, don't start with well-being, because I think well-being is an outcome. Well-being is everyone knows what they need to do to keep themselves fit and well, but they don't do it when they've not got time and they're too busy. So this whole thing about setting boundaries and saying no and not automatically carrying all the responsibility, that is the only way to protect your time, to manage your energy and to embrace your human limits so that you have enough time and headspace and capacity to then do those things you need to do for essential care. And that is what is going to make you a better practitioner all round.
Oh, I love that. That's so wise. Thank you, Rachel, for this conversation.
Great to chat with you. Thanks so much for having me on the podcast.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
Hey, if you found this podcast episode helpful, I would encourage you to like and subscribe. Every time you do, you help a colleague or friend find our podcast, and it can help them too. Don't forget to share it along with your friends. If you're looking for extra help, don't forget we have Charting Champions for physicians and Smarter Charting for nurse practitioners and other clinicians to help you get home with your work done. We are helping you create sustainable clinical medicine. Thanks for listening.